give Dr. Maya Gray a big round of applause. Hi, good evening. I'd like to thank Ms. Donaldson for inviting me here today to talk to you all about a topic that I'm really quite passionate about, vaping. First off, I want to apologize for my gum. I used to be a teacher, and I would shoot myself for being up in a public forum chewing. I'm on that dreaded 6-week postnasal drip of a cold, so I apologize, and I'd like to make it through the talk. So a couple years ago, we in the emergency department started noticing a trend, and people were coming in and testing the waters with us, pulling out these black devices and taking puffs on them as we were interviewing them or they were waiting for their workup. And about 2.5 years ago is when we started noticing the jewels in the e-cigarettes really on a consistent basis. And it was at that point in time, along with educators at South Jeff, my kids go to South Jeff, that I started asking questions because truly I didn't know much about e-cigarettes. So this presentation is just a high overview that I hope will be helpful to you of things that I've picked up through the last 2.5 years. And I'd like to share some of my perceptions as to why I feel that vaping and e-cigarette use is the biggest public health crisis facing our young adults, teenagers at this point in time. So jumping right in, this is what I'd like to go over in the next half hour. Discuss the history of what e-cigarettes are, where they came from, how did they end up in the States, define the different types of e-cigarettes through the last 12 years that they've been here in the marketplace. Discuss the current epidemic and how social media really is tied strongly to the epidemic. And then go backwards a little bit, and I have a slide on cigarettes and the research and when a cigarette was introduced to our marketplace. And I have a lot of questions that I'll ask you to think about so that you have the tools to start asking along the way. And then we're going to talk about the emerging severe pulmonary disease that we're hearing about in the news. What is it? What's causing it? And what the CDC is doing about it and the state is doing about it. And some regulatory bodies who have stepped up to the plate to try and get to the bottom of that because there are a lot of unanswered questions. So, the very first successful e-cigarette, and by that I mean one that actually marketed and made it to the US, decades ago was the very first e-cigarette, but it was never marketed. So the very first successful marketed e-cigarette was developed in China in 2003 by this gentleman, Mr. Han Lick. He is a pharmacist and an inventor and worked for the Ryan Group. And he invented this after his dad died. His dad died from lung cancer linked to cigarette use. And so he was a smoker and recognized what the smoking did, the harmful substances and byproducts of the smoke, that it caused cancer, and not only the lung and other organs. And he wanted to be able to provide a product to the community to try and get off cigarettes. And just, he wasn't doing it to provide a new device for those who never smoked. This was specifically a device to help people eliminate tobacco from the cigarette smoke and supply some nicotine to help with the very real symptoms you go through in withdrawal getting off the cigarettes. So before we go, I think it's important just to review some synonyms that we might hear in our households or with our colleagues and in the community. I have 2 teenage boys, a 16 and a 19-year-old, and when my son said the techno-fogger, I had no idea what it was. So an e-cigarette or a vape is a noun, but it's also a verb. And so if you hear the words e-cigarettes, vape pens, e-hookahs, hookah pens, electronic nicotine delivery systems are called ENDS. My favorite again is Technofogger, Boxmod, Vape God, and Vapocalypse. That's the noun form of these vape pens that people are using. And then the verb is whether someone is vaping, is inhaling, puffed on, draw on, light on, chase the cloud, and ride the mist. So there are all kinds of fun social words describing this technique. So the very first generation e-cigarette, we're at the fourth, just to put it in perspective, was called Cigalike. And it was introduced into the US market in 2006, 2007. And what I want you to remember is this was only 13 years ago. And so tuck that away in your memory. It was marketed as something that was safer than inhaling cigarette smoke. However, there was no evidence-based medicine or research projects to be able to back that up. People just took it off face value. It was a battery-powered device, and there was a battery, a cartridge that would heat up, and then an atomizer, and you would then inhale the vapor, sorry. And at the end, that blue thing was something that lit up, that you knew that when someone was taking a puff and inhaling it, you could tell because it turned blue, trying to simulate a cigarette being lit. The second generation e-cigarette looked a lot different. They realized that, you'll see that they marketed it, and there was a big marketplace for this, and so now they want to make it sexy and glory, and they want to be able to start marketing to all different types of people, and so now they come in different colors. Again, the battery was larger, so longer use. They're now called vape pens, vapes and vaporizers, and this time there's a button that you hit to be able to heat a wired element, which then created vapor when the liquid became a vapor after being heated. The third generation e-cigarettes are called APVs, or Advanced Personal Vaporizers. They're really hard to identify. They come in all different shapes and sizes, as you see. These are refillable. Again, there's a button that you press on the side that then heats the heating element and takes the liquid and makes it a vape. It contains a modified e-cigarette, which is the brain and the power source, and now there are smells and tastes that go along with the vape. So they're still trying to increase this market by making it pleasing to those who use it. The fourth generation e-cigarette is something really pretty amazing. This device on the top right is called a PAX. It is $199, and it's linked to your iPhone. And so you turn it on with your iPhone, and in 20 seconds it heats up. And not only can you inhale the liquid vape, however, there is also another component where you can take dried crushed herbs or marijuana and heat a dried component. And so it's temperature controlled, now interfaces with iPhones and other smartphones, and people can get high on this and use it similarly to a vape. The Juul we're going to talk about a couple times during the presentation because it really is an incredible story. And if any of you students in here are interested in researching something, this is the organization that has created the public health crisis of our youth right now. So it was only introduced in 2015. By 2017, it comprised 76% of the market of what was being sold as an e-cigarette. And the reason why it was so wildly successful is that it marketed in the social media platform. And it was the first company to do this, and still wildly successful. If you look at it, it's small enough to be held in your hand. And when people plug it into the computer, it looks just like a USB drive getting charged up. And so 2.5 years ago, a colleague of mine at South Jeff asked me, had I seen this, and I hadn't, and they were finding them everywhere in the library, attached to the computers, and people were charging it, keeping it in their hand, going to the bathroom, using it, and real nicotine addiction started, at least in the school that my kids go to, quite frequently because of this easy access. So what is an e-cigarette? If you look at the bottom of here, here it is. So right here is a battery, and when you turn on the button here, the battery heats a heating element up here, and your vape juice is surrounding the heating element. When it hits a certain temperature, the liquid becomes a vape, and then you inhale it up here, and that is how the vape is produced from these e-cigarettes. So what's really interesting is, and if you think about it in very general terms, there are chemicals that are in the vape juice that keep it as a juice. Then the companies throw other stuff in there, flavoring, stuff that makes it smell nice, heavy metals, but also some of these are on the black market. They put fentanyl in there, they put THC, cannabinoids, all this stuff. And so there are chemicals that people are using to keep it liquid. And then there are chemicals in that liquid that when heated makes the liquid become vapor. And then there are chemicals, once it's vaped, that are being released. They're called byproducts. So these chemicals, they have tracked to like over 90 in the actual small pod itself. The overwhelming number of those are toxic to the body. So the Juul looks like this. And so the rechargeable battery is now this black piece. You have your e-liquid pods that you purchase with all kinds of flavors and smells that plug in here. Same concept, there's a battery, you heat it up. The heating element, you can see it really nicely here, and I have some examples if you actually want to see them later. This heating element heats up the liquid that then you take the mouthpiece off and you inhale and the vapor. Most importantly, is one single Juul pod is equivalent on average to a pack of cigarettes or 20 cigarettes, so the nicotine in that, which is equivalent to 200 inhalations. When I gave a talk, to put things into perspective, when I gave a talk about a year and a half ago to South Jeff, a student got in trouble because he lit up during my talk on Vaping 101. And so the principal at the time, Mrs. Denny, was really quite frustrated with this gentleman and asked me to speak to him after to see if I can make some headway. And after spending 30 minutes with him, I realized he wasn't doing it out of disrespect for me. He was addicted to nicotine. He was smoking 20 pods a day. So that's 20 packs of cigarettes. So when he was sitting in here I gave an hour and a half talk, I'm lucky it's 30 minutes today, I promise. But I was like 40 minutes into it. He needed that hit, he needed that high. And it became really, it was a moment for me in my career and as a mother, because I then said, well, what are our resources to get him off nicotine? There are not many at all in our young group, in our young adults and teens. And so it was a moment for me to realize what an epidemic we're in right now. So this is just an inside look again at the PAX 3. This is the one that links up with your iPhone. You can smoke the herbs or the marijuana chamber. You can smoke the e-liquid pod. The PAX 3 has 60 plus temperature settings for you to choose from. Average heating time is 20 seconds, and there's an extended battery life. I threw dabs in here just to go over briefly in one slide. So dabs, if you've ever heard that topic, that the word is a super concentrated cannabis. And it's created by extracting THC and other cannabinoids from the cannabis using solvents, again, using chemicals like butane or carbon dioxide. It extracts the THC and it ends up creating in that middle picture this sticky oil. And so that sticky oil product is called wax, shatter, butter, butane hash oil. People use wax vape pens to be able to heat this up, and really high concentrated cannabis is smoked this way. So I recently attended, a couple weeks ago, a toxicology conference at Upstate. And the statistics that I'm going to talk about are often cited. What I didn't know was just how inaccurate they were. And so the statistics that are being published now about the crisis are statistics our kids filled out in a survey. And so many students, will not answer correctly, knowing that some regulatory body might be taking their answer, might know it's them. So this data is from national student surveys. And in 2018, 1 in 4 high school students had used an e-cigarette in the last 3 days. They were more likely to use the e-cigarette versus cigarettes because we have like 124 years of knowing that cigarettes are bad for you. So they're really smart about not using the cigarettes. They're thinking the e-cigarettes are healthy. 73% are using flavored products, so that marketing towards the younger generation is working. 1 in 20 middle school students used in the last 30 days. 57% of those use flavored products, and of those users in both the high school and middle school, 1 in 3 were using THC, or the active ingredient of marijuana, within the e-cigarette. And 4 to 5 youth were purchasing this because they liked the flavor. And that's what they were marketing, and we're being suckered into these marketing tactics. So, as I said before, it became this huge epidemic because the Juul company was the first company really ever to only market in the social arena for the first part of them going live. And I don't have a Twitter account, but my kids do. So they were marketing Twitter, social media, Facebook, YouTube, and the themes were always about independence and sex and rebellion and beauty, and they were attracting our young adults to utilize this chemical, this device, promising it was safer, but it really isn't, and I'd like to get to that shortly. So the devices were sexy, you saw them before, they smell good, they taste good, so who wouldn't want a little maple pancake in the morning, a caramel macchiato in the midday, some Dr. Pepper, Skittles at nighttime? Like the flavors, there are tens of thousands of them to entice people. So this is like a pretty impressive graph if you look at it and keep it simple. The line, right here on the left-hand side of the graph is how many dollars these companies are spending in marketing. So the more money they're marketing, the more youth and young adults are purchasing these products, and there's a direct correlation. So getting back to the case for the Juul. So again, it was introduced in 2015 by these two guys, James Monzi and Adam Bowen. They were at Stanford Design School. They thought, let's just take it to a different level, make it small, make it hidden, no one will know, they're gonna plug it into the computer. And their mission statement was they were dedicated to eliminate cigarettes by offering adult smokers a better alternative to combustible cigarettes. The problem was they advertised to young adults and teens over social media. And so their mission statement protected them from an ethics, but then their marketing tactics were unethical. So they were so successful, by the end of 2018, 76% of the e-cigarettes sold were the Juul. So going back to cigarettes for this one slide, I tried to figure out when the first cigarette was rolled in the US, and they cite that this Washington Duke-Gunnis farm was in 1865 is when the first cigarette was rolled with wax paper. So if you know that, there's been 154 years to study cigarettes, and we know that it's linked to oral cancer. We know it's linked to renal cell or kidney cancer. We know it's linked to lung cancer. We know that it aggravates or causes emphysema. And we know in young people it's linked significantly to testicular cancer. And we know that because we have had time to research it. So how do these e-cigarette and like products market themselves as safe when they've been here 12 years? And so my one question to you is, how do you know that those chemicals that keep it a liquid, those chemicals that make it liquid to gas, and those byproducts are healthy? You don't. We need 20 to 30 to 40 years. And this is dangerous marketing, that they're marketing that it's safer. They are not. No one knows what's going to happen. So our youth are super intelligent. If you look around schools nowadays, they're not smoking cigarettes because they know it's dangerous, because we have the research and the evidence-based medicine that shows us it's dangerous. What they don't know is that in 20 years from now, they're going to have different kinds of cancers, and it's not at all safe. So there's a couple concepts that I want you to keep in mind. We talked about the chemicals. I've already gone over the first part. The second thing, all these e-cigarettes contain nicotine. Nicotine is a highly addictive chemical, different but similar to opioids. They're highly, highly addicted chemicals. And when you get hooked on this, you must go through a withdrawal process that is very uncomfortable to get off, and it's a problem. The vapors that are produced, again, the byproducts, there's only 13 years. There's no way that we know what cancers that these are causing in 13 years. And then now, about 3 years ago, scientists are really starting to look into this. There are a couple chemicals, the toxic byproducts. One is diacetyl. It's linked to very serious lung disease. There's a slide coming up. Heavy metals that are emitted from the heating element, the metal heating element, such as cadmium, chromium, the ones listed here, are linked to birth defects and are carcinogenic. They cause cancer. So in an e-cigarette, you can actually go to the store and decide what kind of nicotine content you want. So a low nicotine e-cigarette is 5 milligrams per cc, and the high ones go up to over 18. So when I said that 1 joule on average is 1 pack of cigarettes, some of the jewels have much higher nicotine, and they're actually similar to like 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes. And so keep that in mind. And nicotine is highly addictive, and it has been shown to be a gateway drug for cigarettes, which is what it's supposed to do to try and get people off cigarettes. And it affects all of your organs. So just quickly going through just the nicotine part and the addiction and the side effects of the nicotine of these substances, it affects the heart. And so it causes this fight or flight response. And if like an example of that is it's Halloween time, right? Your friend, you're walking home from school, your friend wants to play a trick on you. They jump out from behind a bush and scare the bejesus out of you. What happens to your body? You start shaking, the heart rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up. If you're having a couple of pods a day, your heart rate goes up and stays up, and your blood pressure goes up and stays up, and your body doesn't get a rest. So what happens? The heart is a muscle. It becomes thick because it needs to keep pumping, pumping, and pumping, and pumping. So your heart gets thicker. You actually are predisposed to having heart attacks. And we're starting to see young people dropping dead from irregular heart rhythms because of these abnormal, thick heart muscles. And so we're seeing premature heart disease in patients using e-cigarettes. It also affects the lung. When you inhale those vapors, it's an irritant. And when you inhale it, it burns the inside of your lung. And so what happens? You lose the ability to fight off a cold. So it's hard to cough. The ability of coughing to get up the junk from the lungs is impaired. And currently there's studies that state that vaping is no better for lungs than cigarette smoke. So I mentioned diacetyl before. And I'm trying the pictures here are trying to illustrate what I think is part of the severe pulmonary disease that we're seeing. So the difference between the smoke of taking a puff from a cigarette and taking a hit from a Juul is that the cigarette puff has macromolecules in it. So when you inhale it, they kind of stop in the early part. They get stuck in the early part of the lung and maybe the middle part. The smoke in the Juuls and e-cigarette-like products are made of micromolecules. So they go all the way down your bronchus, your bronchioles, and they hit the alveoli. Your alveoli are these sacs at the end of your bronchus, these little balls right here. They're responsible for letting CO2 out and bringing oxygen in. They're the filter of the lung. And these macromolecules are burning permanently the alveoli and lead to, and in the beginning they started seeing popcorn lung, but I think they're thinking that this burning is causing a chemical pneumonitis, causing severe respiratory failure and the current problems going on now. This is irreversible. You burn an alveoli, it's gone. You don't get it back. There's no regeneration. So this is a really important concept, I think, for any of us who want to continue to learn. I just took my boards again for the third time 2 weeks ago. There's a part of 54. I have to continue to learn. Your brain needs to continue to work, and as you get older, that brain function goes a little by the wayside, so you don't want anything messing with it if you don't have to. Nicotine itself, just the nicotine in cigarettes and e-cigarettes, when you take a puff, it reaches your brain in 7 seconds. Until your mid-20s, your brain circuits are not fully developed. So what that means is that nicotine will permanently affect those brain circuits, and permanently. It is not reversible. And people who are addicted to nicotine, whether it's cigarettes or e-cigarette-like products, have learning difficulties, poor attention, and poor impulse control. It also affects your gums and teeth, and I can tell with my patients in the emergency department who's using e-cigarettes, smoking cigarettes, or methamphetamine, because your teeth kind of look like the above. I've seen numerous patients who the e-cigarette itself has exploded randomly. Usually it's while their patient is holding it or it's in their pocket. I just had a case 2 months ago where it exploded in a male's pocket, and he had a second-degree burn to his thigh in the scrotal area. So most of these patients, as you can see, would need to be transferred at least up here to Syracuse to the burn center. And most concerning is that these nicotine pods, the e-liquid pods, smell good, taste good, and are incredibly deadly to infants. So if you have younger brothers or sisters or cousins, if one of those pods are let out, 1 drop of that pod can kill an infant. So nicotine toxicity, the poison control in our area has seen a 1,500% increase in toxicity exposure to nicotine, and there are so many reported cases in New York State alone of death in kids. So, as I said before, nicotine is a highly addictive drug. People are getting addicted to it, and if you want to stop cold turkey, which I always advocate to try to do, or at least get help, there are real withdrawal symptoms. People get irritable, they have trouble concentrating, they get depressed, anger, moody, increased hunger, which causes you weight gain, and then people want to go back on it. You have trouble sleeping, and restlessness. And so there is a pamphlet put together by Anita and her colleagues from the Alliance that is outside that I implore you to take for your friends or yourself. There are 4 local numbers that you can call. It's a multi-discipline problem to try and get off nicotine. There's medications that can help, therapy, behavioral kind of changes. Multiple disciplines need to be involved. It's a really hard thing to get off this addiction. So, you guys have seen in the news There have been, I just updated it, every other Thursday, feel free to go onto the CDC website. They update the number of deaths and illnesses. So there's something called a severe pulmonary disease that's being linked to the e-cigarettes. And as of October 15th, there are approximately 1,500 cases in 49 states, 33 deaths. Interestingly, 70% were men. The average age was 23. However, it ranged from a 13-year-old up to a 75-year-old. 36% of the deaths are under 21 years of age. The majority of these are associated with e-cigarettes and THC, but 20% are not. And so when these patients come in, we're doing toxicology urine screens to see if there's THC registering. So 20% are not, 80% are. And they're not finding any infectious cause for it, not like a pneumonia or strep or staph might be causing it, or the flu. So they're non-infectious causes, and they think it's the chemicals emitted from the byproducts that are burning the lung causing these problems. And interestingly, these people are presenting with GI symptoms first, not pulmonary, so it's nausea, vomiting, belly pain, diarrhea. Then they're developing fevers, and then they're coming in an acute respiratory failure with low oxygen. And the only thing we can do for these people is put them on a ventilator, support them, and some make it and some don't. So if you look at the x-ray on your left, that's normal. So this is what normal lungs look like. The heart's in the middle. This is normal lungs filled with air, so there's a lot of black component to it. The people coming in with a severe pulmonary disease, they're coming in like this. There's a chemical pneumonitis. It's a whiteout. Your alveoli are filled with fluid, and there's no way for those alveoli to help exchange oxygen for CO2, so they're coming in severely low oxygen, hypoxic, and so many of them need to go on a ventilator. So many of the cases of these patients coming in with a severe pulmonary disease are coming in because they've messed with the product. I'm sure you've seen in articles too in the news that there's a big bootleg component to this. There are people taking either used Juul pods or empty ones and creating their own THC Juul pods that people are buying in the black market. You cannot trust that. You have no idea what kind of chemicals are in there. There's no oversight. And they're finding that for those that are bootlegged and on the black market, the carcinogens and the chemicals are much higher doses. I throw this in here because I didn't know what it was from my first speaking about this topic. So dripping. 1 in 4 students who vape also drip. So they break down the e-cigarette so that the heating element is visible. And they're taking the pod themselves and dropping the liquid right on the element and then inhaling it as it's being vaporized. The problem with dripping is that the temperature of the actual vape juice is a lot higher because it's directly on the heating element versus being surrounded by the heating element, and the byproducts are much more dangerous. I showed this presentation to my son last night, who's a junior at South Jeff, and he asked me to add this slide because he's seeing this with a lot of the students. I didn't know what it was until last night. So Zyn is now big. It's a company from Sweden that made a lot of money in Europe selling this product, and early this year hit the US marketplace. And what they are selling is these packets that are white, tobacco-free, gluten-free, spit-free, filled with nicotine. And so the kids are putting it in the pouch between their gum and their cheek for about an hour to 2 at a time. Again, there's flavor, and it's a pure nicotine high. And so I wanted to introduce you to this because when I talk about it, it gets ingrained in my old brain. So it is here. So what has the science community done regarding the severe pulmonary disease? Mid-September, the CDC activated its Emergency Operations Center, which allows many agencies to interact. In New York State, in mid-September, Governor Cuomo became the first state that advocated to ban flavored vaping products because they want to decrease the appeal to people. Unfortunately, the appeals court has that on hold, and it hasn't been enacted yet. What do I do in the emergency department when we suspect a case? Any case of someone coming in with any respiratory symptoms that are flu negative, don't have signs or features of bacterial infection. Now it's a standardized question on our question sheet of whether you've used e-cigarette-related products in the last 90 days, and if so, we call our New York State Upstate Poison Control, and they're our regulatory body up here reporting it to the state. And we need to answer a ton of questions, like, give us a device if you will give it to us. We send the device to them in a prepackaged thing, and the CDC is running these cases and following these people. So there's the Alliance has been very helpful getting resources. There's a packet in the back with information and numbers for people wanting to get off these products, and these four people can help direct you to the right place. I've left this presentation for Ms. Donaldson to pass to whomever with some resources for you to access if you're interested in this topic. I was trying to think of a cool name, and I'm so straight, I just called it Vaping 101, but these are some fun names that some kids at elementary school students helped me. So I am done, and we're going to do questions after, right? Okay, thank you.